Good afternoon, grade 7. It's me, Teacher Clair, and this video is brought to you by Camtop International School. Thank you, everyone, for attending our class today, and I look forward to receive your outputs for today as well. Alright, so let's get started. Previously, we learned about how to choose a title. So when you write a story or when you write an article, it is important for you to choose or to know what title would you put on your story, or what title would you use. Because titles is very important because it can catch the attention of your readers. Like just based on the title of the story, it will give an impression, or it will catch the interest of your readers. So it's very important to choose a very nice title. Now, what are the things that we need to consider when we choose a title? It should be at least not more than 5 words, right? So if it's 5 words and more, it's quite very long, but it doesn't mean that you are not allowed to do that. You can still do that. Like, you can write even 10 words, but it is better to write a simpler and shorter title. Most stories, it's just 1 or 2 words, right? So as I mentioned before, based on my experience, if a book is too long, the title is too long, sometimes I just don't read it anymore, okay? Alright, so choosing a title. It should also be unique. It gives the idea, or it will give at least an idea of what is your story is all about. Okay? Alright, next, blurb. So what is a blurb again? This is like a short summary written at the back of your story or the book. So let's say you wrote a story, blurb is at the back of your book. So we are just reviewing in here, right? So it's here. So this would be the blurb. Where's the blurb? I don't understand this one, but I think this is the blurb. Okay. So blurb is at the back of the book. It is also like a summary, and it will give you an idea of what the story is all about. And normally it is ended with a question. So they will let you hang in. So why are we asking this question? I want to know the answer to this question too. So since you want to know the answer to that question in the blurb, you will have to read the story. Nice, right? Okay, there you go. So that will be just a review. Now for today, we are still on Unit 6, and we are going to learn fairy tales in fantasy. Okay, so when you heard me saying fairy tale and fantasy, you might think, oh, it's the same. I think they're the same. It's about imagination, it's not real. But no, there's a difference between these two, and that's what we're going to learn today. Okay? So as I grow up, I'm surrounded by friends, family, cousins. We always watch fairy tales and fantasy. It's very fun, it's very interesting, and it will also boost your imagination. Okay, so let's learn and let's get into it. So fairy tale is a traditional story written for children that usually involves imaginary creatures and magic. But we are not just limited to children, because fairy tale actually it can be for everyone, for all people, teenagers like you, mommy, daddy, everyone. So, but though fairy tale it is used to how do you say this? To attract young children, because it's fun. It has magic, right? So it's more suitable for children, but actually it's still for everyone. Okay, so again, a fairy tale is a traditional story written for children that usually involves imaginary creatures and imagination. It's not real. So you can create your own character. So if you want to create a flying pig, okay, a flying pig, which is color blue or yellow, then you can create your own character, okay? Because it's just imagination, it doesn't have to be real. Okay, that's for fairy tale. Now let's move on to fantasy. Fantasy is a genre in literature that includes magical or supernatural elements as part of the plot. Again, it's a genre in literature that includes magical or supernatural elements. So, teacher, it's the same, right? Fairy tale and fantasy is the same. They are imaginary, it's fake, supernatural, it's about magic. So what's the difference? Because they're both the same. So the main difference, everyone, is that remember the difference, okay? So a fantasy is in a larger view, in general, okay? Fantasy. So if this is fantasy, under we have many kinds, okay? So this is fantasy, this is in general. In fairy tale is just one of fantasies. Okay? Alright, so that's the difference. So fantasy, we have so many kinds of fantasy under it, okay? In fairy tale, it's just one of it. So fantasy doesn't always have to be a fairy tale. So a fairy tale, most of the time, if you're looking for a once upon a time, there's a beautiful lady, and at the end it will say happily ever after. Most probably that is a fairy tale, okay? So it's about good and evil, about changing physical appearance, once upon a time, happily ever after. That is a fairy tale, okay? So for you to better understand, if you know Harry Potter may be fantasy, but not a fairy tale, okay? Harry Potter may be fantasy, but not a fairy tale. Why? Because Harry Potter involves magic, what else? Greed, it's about growing up, it's about learning, it's about wizard. It's not really about love story, about a princess or a king or a queen. That's why it's not a fairy tale, but it is a fantasy, okay? So Harry Potter may be fantasy, but not a fairy tale. While on the other hand, Cinderella, if you know Cinderella, is a fairy tale within the larger genre of fantasy. So Cinderella is a fantasy and it is a fairy tale. Harry Potter is a fantasy, but it is not a fairy tale. It's one of these kinds. Understand? I hope you understand. Okay, so not to worry because I'll give you more examples of fantasy stories, maybe if you want to watch or if you want to read. There's a lot. You can just do a research about it, okay? So I hope it's clear. Now when we say fantasy, it's a larger, what's that? It's in general, okay? It's in general, and fairy tale is just like a kind of a fantasy. It's kind of fantasy. I just wanted to make it simple for you guys. Okay, so that's the difference. Fantasy, and under fantasy, we have your fairy tale, okay? And another, like for example, fruits. Okay. Fruits is in general. there's a lot of fruits. And under fruits, we have apple, we have orange, we have pineapple, we have watermelon. So the same thing, this is fantasy, and under fantasy, we have fairy tale. Okay? Alright, I hope that's clear, everyone. And again, both. So when we say fantasy and fairy tale, they're still the same. It's about supernatural things, imaginary characters, and creatures, and about magic, and it's very interesting. So a lot of movies and stories are being written until now because this attracts a lot of people when they create movies like fantasy movies or fairy tale movies. It's always something that people look forward to because it's very, very interesting. Alright, so there you go. I hope that you learned something about our presentation today. So fantasy and fairy tale, and also don't forget about how to choose a title, and don't forget what you mean by blurb. Alright, so that's it, everyone. I'll see you later. After this video, you will have to do an activity, so good luck. Okay, I'm back, grade 7. This will be another activity. This is to find out if you understand our lesson today, which is about fantasy and fairy tales. So all you have to do is to copy these story titles, and then beside it, you just have to write if it's a fantasy or a fairy tale. Okay, so we have Alice in Wonderland. Is it a fairy tale or a fantasy? So you have to do a little bit of a research, okay? Next, we have your 100 Years of Solitude. So if you also want to learn how to read this, just follow after me. Number 3, Snow White. Number 4, The Lion, The Witch in the Wardrobe. Number 5, we have Frog Prince, very famous. Number 6, The Gingerbread Man. Number 7, The Lord of the Rings. This is very famous too. Number 8, Jack and the Beanstalk. Number 9, Hansel and Gretel. Okay. And number 10, The Hobbit. Okay. So all you have to do, everyone, is to search if these stories is a fantasy or a fairy tale. You have to copy this on your notebook, and beside you have to write if it's a fantasy or a fairy tale. Okay? Alright? So